Hello and welcome to Speaking Out on Financial Abuse, stories of survival and hope after financial abuse in a marriage or romantic partnership. I'm your host, Lori G., and today you're going to meet a true champion achiever in the field of domestic abuse. Maisha Colter is the Chief Executive Officer with the Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse, or AVDA, based in the great state of Texas. Maisha is passionate about bringing critically needed legal services to victims and survivors of domestic abuse, as well as affecting changes in how faith communities respond to relationship violence. I'm excited to have her here today to talk about how organizations can better support the legal needs of survivors. Maisha, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So, where in the world are you, and where are you originally from?
I am in Houston, Texas, downtown Houston, to be precise. I am originally from a myriad of places. I was born in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and my parents were in the military. And so I traveled extensively because of their career and lived many, many places. The longest places that I lived besides here in Texas, Munich, Germany, for about 6 years. And then I also lived in New York for a very long time, New York City and other places in New York State.
Which weather do you like the most?
You know what? I like seasons. And I will tell you that Houston can have multiple seasons in one day. It's pretty frustrating sometimes, but basically it's hot and humid. And so I would prefer anything other than that on most days. And yeah, I think New York was quite good because it had all of the things, all of the seasons.
And plus it's on the coast, so it's not as extreme as like the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
Before we even get into talking about the AVDA or the Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse, let's talk something about you, because you really have an impressive and widespread experience and education that it seems like it's a perfect fit for this field of domestic violence support. Can you tell us more about your educational and professional journey before you came to the AVDA?
I was educated in Syracuse, New York undergrad. I had a bachelor's in policy studies and a bachelor's in social work. And then I went on to pursue what at the time was a dual degree that NYU offered. You can get both in a matter of 4 years. It was a very intense program and it was difficult for me. And so I wound up not doing law school and just getting my master's in social work and started working after I got my master's. My first job was with an organization that worked with children who were in foster care, and they were working to try to do family reunification. I was a clinical social worker, mostly working with those children, doing play therapy, art therapy with them, and then also doing parent interactive therapy. So my job ultimately required that I go to court on a pretty regular basis to testify about the progress and the treatment of those children who were in the program that I worked for. It's called Brooklyn Bureau of Community Services, and make recommendations about whether or not reunification was appropriate and ready. Were the parents and the children ready for reunification? And I stumbled upon a lot of different issues, having the ability to observe court proceedings, be a part of them. And then it sort of propelled me back to why didn't I finish law school? And so I decided to go back and chose to go to Rutgers and complete my law degree. And that ultimately is what led me to Houston. I was working as a social worker and would probably be working as a public interest lawyer when I graduated from law school. And I knew that New York was too expensive for what would probably be my income. And so I was like, where else can I live with a better cost of living? And landed on Houston, Texas.
So you got involved in the legal profession by actually doing the legal profession. You came in not as somebody who became interested in going to law school. You actually were already hands-on, kind of on the front lines. So I would call that a talent. What caused you to make that decision that, you have this background already in social work? What caused you to say, okay, I'm going to jump into the field of law as well, aside from the fact that you were already doing it?
Part of it was that there's certain elements of the law that are obviously useful, the advocacy and being able to help somebody's position and make sure that their rights are being protected and those kinds of things sort of align anyway with social work in many respects. And so they, to me, are a very good marriage. And I think what one doesn't have, the other does. So you get to be more well-rounded advocate. You certainly get to understand the legal system in a way that you would not necessarily necessarily be educated around as a social worker. So the two skills were just very attractive to me. And again, at the end of the day, my purpose for doing social work and or law is always about advocacy and looking at someone and trying to help empower them, and especially vulnerable populations. And there are so many to choose from. So it just so happened that my interests have always been with children and women's issues. And so the domestic violence was a sort of natural alignment as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case, that when it comes to women's issues and family issues, domestic violence does follow pretty close behind. And it mentions in your bio that you became the director of litigation and that you led a staff of attorneys and paralegals who fight on behalf of victims of abuse. And then, of course, later becoming the chief executive officer of the AVDA. How rare is it for someone to have that combination of education and skills?
It happens every once in a while when we're interviewing for attorneys. I will see attorneys who have an MSW. So it is more common than it probably was 30 years ago when I started out. At the point that I started the dual program, I think those were all very new. So you could get like a JD and a business, an MBA or JD and something else. And so that became sort of available education-wise, at least about 30 years ago now. And it obviously has picked up some momentum, but I don't think it is still common. Certainly, if I ask my staff currently, and we have 9 attorneys besides myself, none of them have a master's degree in social work or that clinical training. They learn on the job often, but that's not something that they typically come equipped with.
They have a passion for it.
Yeah, they definitely have a passion for advocacy, working with vulnerable populations. Some of them have their own personal experiences with domestic violence, and that sort of propels them to be very specific about what the work is that they do. So different reasons, but certainly the interest in becoming trauma-informed requires a different skills that is certainly not offered in any law schools that I'm aware of, just in a traditional Socratic method training of lawyers.
Well, and we've gotten so much better over the last, I'd say, 15 years, 20 years of recognizing domestic violence as physical abuse, emotional abuse, and providing support and tools. But when it's come to the legal side and the financial abuse side, we've been kind of doing some catch up, I feel, and providing, first of all, emergency for somebody who's got to flee within hours is not just shelter, but very often there could be some serious financial issue as well. And just getting some direction. Have you seen that as well? Have you seen a lot more development even within your own organization?
Most people still think of domestic violence and they automatically think about physical abuse and the black eye. But truth be told, economic abuse is much more prevalent and substantial in almost every client story that I'm aware of. It exists, and it exists in a broad spectrum of ways, and people don't think about economic abuse in the way that it currently or oftentimes presents. So I can give you multiple examples of economic abuse, and they look different from client to client. So for many of our clients, economic abuse looks like complete isolation from decision-making around finances, no idea who the mortgage is, or when documents are put in front of them as autonomous adults, you kind of get to read what's there and make decisions, and that doesn't happen. Their credit is used for the sake of the abuser. I have had clients who worked every day and still had to turn over money to the abuser. I have had abusers who squander money, whether that's because of an addiction or a gambling problem. And it puts our client in, just a very bad economic circumstance that she has to sort of make everything work, despite the fact that you have someone who should be sharing the economic responsibility in a household, taking care of children, and that isn't happening. So abuser gets to do whatever they want to do with their money and your money too, and you still somehow need to make sure that kids get fed, that there's a roof over everyone's head.
Yeah, power's on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's really just about power and control. And again, I know people who have full-time jobs who work every day and they don't have power, control, and autonomy around their economic situation or circumstances. And that is what economic abuse abuse is.
Yeah, and there's two different kinds. Yeah, you've got the reluctant breadwinner with the deadbeat who always manages to, their efforts are never mandatory financially. And it's very, very hellish when you have children together. You end up responsible not only for everyday stuff, but for all the surprise things those partners tend to do as well that end up being your financial problem. And then you have the other financial victim or survivor who has never had any kind of autonomy in a marriage and who's maybe never had a checkbook. Like you said, it's really so individual, each situation. And 99% of all domestic violence situations do involve financial abuse.
Yeah.
So it's really refreshing that especially important organizations like yours in such a huge, influential state like Texas to be getting out on the forefront and talking about economic abuse as well, because it can last a lifetime.
Yes.
Not the physical abuse and emotional abuse can't last a lifetime, but financial abuse can really, really destroy your dreams. Now, you've had dedicated involvement yourself with the AVDA for over 14 years. How did this wonderful ongoing partnership start between you and the organization?
Actually been closer to 19 years, but
oh, wow.
I'll tell you how it started. So when I moved here to Houston, I immediately started working after I took the bar just because I needed to support myself. And I got a job as a social worker. And so I was happy doing the work that I was doing. And I had to have that question of what am I doing? Why do I have a law degree if I'm not actually using it? My parents were asking the same question. They had incurred a whole bunch of debt themselves for my education. So
I was going to say, yeah. What are you doing lately with that law degree?
Yes. And so I set out, I literally did, I don't even know if it was Google, it might have been a Yahoo search. And I just put social work and law agencies or something like that. And AVDA came up and basically asked if I could volunteer, told her I'm a clinical social worker, but I also have a law degree and I see that you all do legal services and I'd love to help in any way that I could. She said, let's meet, let's have, and it was coffee. I don't even drink coffee, but we met at a coffee shop above a grocery store in downtown Houston and we just got to talking. And that conversation lasted several hours. At the end of the conversation, she said, what if I were to hire you as a staff attorney? At the time, that was not how AVDA worked. It was basically attorneys who were contract with them. They had their own law practices and they would come in and there was a team of paralegals and they would work the cases and then they would give them to the attorneys to represent those individuals in court. Well, our director at the time was an attorney herself and she didn't like the model. And I agreed with her just in that conversation. And ultimately, I decided to quit my job and come work at AVDA as the staff attorney and change the way we did business. And so that's how it started. And I stayed with the organization for approximately 4 years. We changed the model. We do everything in-house instead of having contract attorneys. They're full-time employees. We started doing a one-to-one where each attorney got their own paralegal. Back then it was 2 of us at first, and then it turned into 3, and then it turned into 4. And now it is 9 attorneys and 9 paralegals representing more than 2,000 individuals a year in family court in various ways, representing them for divorce, custody, child support, modifications of existing orders. When there's been a fatality as a result of domestic abuse, we do adoptions or we get custody for left behind grandparents, or sometimes it's a neighbor, someone who will step in and care for those children. So there's extensive legal representation, high conflict litigation. Primarily, our issue is custody and children. Every once in a while, we'll have some property issues that we need to resolve. But most of our clients are low income or what we call ALICE. And ALICE just stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed people. So they are with employment. They wouldn't qualify for legal aid because legal aid is calculated by the federal poverty cutoff, but they wouldn't have the money to pay a decent family lawyer, a lawyer who does family law.
A good reputable attorney.
Correct. Yeah. At the hourly rates that people tend to charge.
Yeah. I mean, $400 an hour, $40 an hour. I say $40 an hour to $400 an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Easy.
So you're really running basically an in-house legal advocacy firm, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is it staffed when you say you've got 9 attorneys? Is it the same 9 attorneys? Do you rotate different attorney advocates or How does that work?
It's full-time employees. There are 9 attorneys. We have a main office in downtown Houston. We have another location in Fort Bend County, Texas, in Missouri City. Stafford. Texas is where that office is. Then we have a satellite out in Hempstead. It's basically a more rural area in the greater Houston community. So we serve multiple counties: Austin, Grimes, Harris, Fort Bend, Waller, Washington counties. But besides our legal services, we have a counter program, I would say, in that it is directed toward those who have been identified as abusive. So we run the state's largest BIPP program, and BIPP stands for Battering Intervention Prevention Program.
Yeah, it's becoming less rare what you have in place. You are the first organization that I had the opportunity to meet with that was doing something that is an intervention program for the perpetrators. So this intervention program that you are doing, you call it the BIPP program, is the Battering Intervention and Prevention Program. How does that work?
Most of the people who come to us, probably more than 90% of them, come to us because they have been charged with a family violence crime. It could be a misdemeanor. It could be a felony. Generally speaking, they are convicted of that crime. And as a part of their sentence, they're required. For our state, BIPP is regulated. Certified BIPPs are regulated. And you have a minimum participation requirement of 18 weeks. At AVDA, our practitioners in the BIPP program are all licensed mental health professionals. So we have licensed professional counselors, licensed clinical social workers, psychologists who facilitate our BIPP program. We have a curriculum that is designed to allow someone to start and complete 18 weeks of different sessions. It is mostly about re-education around gender roles, communication. Oftentimes, people who are in the BIPP program will be individuals who themselves were raised in households where domestic violence occurred.
Yeah,
so they've
absolutely.
adopted those behaviors in their adult relationships and don't necessarily see anything wrong with what they are doing, the choices that they're making in their intimate relationships, and until they are confronted with a law, with criminal conviction or something of that magnitude. But that essentially is what is available to individuals who want to do something different going forward, make better choices when they are with an intimate partner.
Is the program proprietary, or is it like a statewide, or is it like, Alcoholics Anonymous has the same 12 steps in every program that you go to? I mean, every meeting you go to?
That's a great question, Lori. I'll tell you why. Because it was proprietary. At first, early 80s, AVDA had a program called the Pivot Program. One of our founding mothers, Dr. Toby Meyer, basically did her dissertation and her study on battering intervention and had looked at different models of programs around the country at the time in the early 80s that would allow there to be some type of change for the abuser. And that's part of why it was called Pivot. And Pivot just, means to turn around.
Yeah.
And so they were facilitating BIPP before BIPP was state sanctioned with all of the sort of required certifications and steps that you have to take to be a regulated BIPP program in our state. So they basically adopted what AVDA was doing 10 years before it became something that the state regulated and funded. Because when people come to BIPP, they are required to pay fees, part of the accountability aspect of it. But the state also adopted that model in that participants do have to pay fees. It's usually a sliding scale. They do take into account someone's income, much like when people get convicted of other crimes, there's restitution and obligations.
Community service fees. Yeah.
Correctly. Mm-hmm. Yes. So BIPP participants do pay for the services.
Well, they want you to be invested in it.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that where, by comparison, someone who's arrested on a DUI in order to Alcoholics Anonymous, other than reporting that you've been there, I don't think you need to pay anything. I mean, you can throw $1 in the basket, but I don't think it requires that kind of investment. And I like that idea. But you do some other really unique outreaches. And I saw that you do an event that you call the annual Interfaith Workshop and Vigil. That is something I've never heard of. What is this annual workshop and event?
So AVDA and two other organizations come together to help with training for those who might encounter survivors of domestic abuse from the faith communities. And it is interfaith. So we are looking at all types of religions and practices that people seek. We want the rabbi, we want the imam, we want the pastor, whoever is going to be encountering people and counseling them, especially in life's crises. And certainly domestic violence is a place of crisis for many people. And generally speaking, people will seek solace from a trusted advisor like a faith practitioner. Mm-hmm. And so that was the intention, is to kind of educate those individuals around how they communicate, what they communicate, how they use their faith teaching to integrate safety for individuals, as well as how they might help to intercede on behalf of a survivor when they recognize the abuse is happening. So we do that every year. And then the vigil component is an acknowledgement of the people who have lost their lives as a result of domestic abuse in our state. And we call the names of those individuals. Every year, an organization called Texas Council on Family Violence does a report. That report is called Honoring Texas Victims. And what it is a compilation of acknowledgments and recognitions of people who succumb to domestic violence at the hand of their abuser. And since 2019, those numbers had kind of skyrocketed, doubled in some instances here in Harris County, and they're maybe a little flat now. But in any event, Harris County has the largest number of domestic violence fatalities annually in our state. And so we wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that it is happening and try to come together thoughtfully around how to prevent these deaths and certainly to prevent the escalation of homicides in our county. And we rely on the faith community to be partners and to be interveners on behalf of survivors in their work.
Well, that is such a critical life-saving or life and death issue, because a woman especially, and I can say this from my own experience, will very often go to their religious authorities first. Especially if you are very fundamental in your upbringing and also in your belief system, and you wouldn't think of going anywhere else. But the lack of awareness within many religious institutions, there's very little training. Many religious authorities have had like a 6-week course during seminary training on this or that. They don't have a lot of domestic violence awareness. But yet, a woman is more apt to go to religious authorities, but unfortunately, she may be more apt to be told to, stay, pray, and submit and hope that things get better.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But the statistics are that survivors of domestic violence who have gone to the religious authorities, none of those suggestions ever worked for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It unfortunately, it can be a trap. You cry out for help, and then you are basically actively engaged in a intervention that propels you not only to go back, but to stay and be resolute in victimization. It's pretty astonishing, but that is absolutely real and true data as far as my experience has been in regard to how victims are treated in certain faiths and in certain communities, for sure.
Well, with financial abuse especially, because we are such a globally cultural country now, if being in the United States, that, in certain traditions, certain religions, women already have an expected autonomy or lack of autonomy when it comes to finances. So very often, if you are under domestic violence and you are going to religious authorities, it's basically just not a woman's place. You must have to be really creative in your outreach. And that's what I love about this annual interfaith workshop and vigil. That's a really creative way to reach out to leadership in all different types of religious beliefs.
100%.
Yeah. And, kind of going into that topic, has there been challenges in bringing outreach to such a rich, diverse community?
Yeah, Texas is definitely a pretty large and diverse state, and it is more so diverse here in Houston, Harris County, Fort Bend County, particularly. I have heard people report that it is the most diverse county in the United States.
Wow.
And so we have people from all over the world speaking all types of different languages.
That must be cool, though.
It is very cool. It's cool because I'm a foodie. But to your question and to your point, yes, it can be very difficult to break those barriers. And I will say that we have some pretty outstanding, culturally specific community organizations that address the issue of domestic abuse. And we certainly collaborate and partner with many of them. Ones that come to mind, DAIA, ANISA, they are all organizations that serve, in those instances, they serve South Asian population. There are other organizations, SOS Boat, just many who are trying to reach survivors and reach them where they are in terms of their experience, their community, their culture. We have another organization that I'm fond of. It's called the Empowered Survivor, and they work with African American women who have a unique experience culturally as well as survivors of domestic abuse. And so that helps to bridge barriers that are erected for all survivors of domestic abuse, but then it gets down to the specifics of the individual person within a certain culture or in certain communities. And that's very, very critical. AVDA is not a culturally specific place. We are here to help and serve any and everyone that is a survivor. We are always trying to be culturally competent. We take into account language and culture and ethics, ethnicity as we relate to the clients that we're serving. We spend lots of money and resources when we get it directly trying to serve various populations, whether that means hiring translators or adopting literature in multiple languages. We are very mindful that we need to be able to communicate effectively. And that means it's things as simple as making sure it's in the language, but also that there is a cultural competency around the communication, what is being communicated and how it's being communicated and by whom.
Oh, for sure, especially if it's a woman coming recently from somewhere. And it can be pretty intimidating if you're under domestic violence and trying to reach out to an agency. And that's amazing that you have kind of multi-channeled everything so that you have people that can be sensitive and know the culture and know the tradition.
Yes.
You have a lot of ways that you folks partner and receive funding, but you also do a lot of your own events. What do you have coming up for the rest of 2025?
The Home Safe Home Gala is our annual event. It's always in October, which is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This year will be October the 15th, and it will be at the Thompson Hotel. The point of the night and the event is obviously to bring awareness, but also to acknowledge the work that AVDA does for the community. We have a theme around transforming lives, and we really do believe that that is our gift to the community is transformation. When people come to us, they should look different at the time that they leave us. So if they are physically, verbally, emotionally abused, economically abused, there should be some transformation in their lifestyle, their life circumstances. They should have a self-sufficiency plan, and we should have achieved something on their behalf, whether that be to get them consistent child support, to get them property in a divorce circumstance. So that's what we do. We celebrate the wins of the organization while educating the community about the need and the necessity of an organization like AVDA, because we are unique even in the domestic violence world. Most of the people who think about domestic violence will think about shelters. When they think of an agency or an organization, they don't immediately think about lawyers and paralegals and client advocates or trauma counselors, not immediately. But the work that our team does has a direct effect on all aspects of a person's life after they make that decision to leave.
How do you stay positive and hopeful all the time, being the head of an organization where you have a lot of trauma coming through your door? You have success stories and you have stories that aren't successful. And this happens as though you're running a hospital.
Yeah, sometimes, it's a triage circumstance for us.
Thank you. That's the right
very
word.
Very much like a hospital. When people come to us, oftentimes we have a longstanding collaboration with the police. And so many of our client advocates are actually co-located with 4 of the HPD, the Houston Police Department's family violence units. So people are coming in to make police reports. They are battered, they are bruised. They may have just come from a hospital and then from hospital to police and so on and so forth. And so, it is a triage type event for many of our staff. And we understand that vicarious trauma is real. And so we do try to take steps to acknowledge that in the work that we do, in the way that we establish the culture of work here. The basic thing is to recognize that we all, as caregivers, as people who are caring for trauma and traumatized individuals, need our own care, self-care. And for me, self-care is really individualized. So we don't say, okay, everybody does this thing or that thing, but we certainly try to acknowledge. Yeah, so everybody should do something that will ultimately help them get to a place where they can keep doing it, that they avoid burnout, that they avoid a sense of dread doing the work. And so that is something that we try to highlight. And then we do have in-office things that we do on a monthly basis just to kind of make things lighter, have some relief around the work that we do. And so I think if you are mindful that you should be doing that and you actually take affirmative steps, then you can sustain this path for a very long time as a worker and as a server doing this particular work. And certainly having good stories and more good stories than bad ones help substantially.
Well, Maisha, this has been really a fun and really interesting conversation. And I have two questions that I ask every guest. What is your tip for someone who is listening right now, who is under domestic abuse, but is afraid to take any steps and hasn't taken any steps yet?
I like for people to know that they are not alone and that, unfortunately, domestic violence is a public health crisis and it happens to many, many people in our country, and that there are so many people willing to help. And I suspect that wherever someone is, there are organizations, there are individuals who would be more than happy to sit with them, talk with them, come up with a safety plan, because that's probably the first thing that every single person who is dealing with domestic abuse needs, is a plan of leaving, plan of action. And that's something that needs to be quiet and stealth and thoughtful. And so that would be my encouragement, is to seek out resources that could help them really, really understand what is available to them in their area, that would allow them to leave safely, that would allow them to remain safe and away from their abusive partner. So that's my most important, I think, tip, is safety planning, and that you are not alone. This is a common thing. I cannot tell you how many times that encounter people and they say, well, what do you do? And I tell them what I do and they go, oh, I wish I would have known about you guys when I went through my thing in. And it happens to me so often, just out in the world, at the grocery store type events. And that's what I think sometimes people miss in isolation, is that they think that they're by themselves and that there's nobody who will understand their particular situation.
Or they're so micromanaged that they're afraid, if I even dip my toe in the water and contact you, the whole cavalry is going to show up.
Yeah.
And and my abuser's going to know. And now they know I've contacted you. I mean, it's like this unknown thing you do when you send that email or make that phone call, because it's a tangible thing you're doing.
Most of us who do this professionally are very stealth. We understand that, and we don't do that. It's very unlikely that you would expose yourself in any instance. We go so far as, when you get a phone call from this organization, there's a dummy phone number that shows up on the other side. So no one can go back and trace the number and say, oh, you're getting calls from aid to victims of domestic abuse, are you? That can't happen. And we are that assertive in our stance on keeping things private, people being protected. So know that many, many organizations think about that and recognize that that might be a part of the fear. And they have
your safety is a priority.
Yeah, they have lots of things in place to help not expose you when you are making the decision to leave.
Yeah, for sure. And what is your tip for someone listening right now who is newly out of a domestic abuse partnership, but they have no idea what they should do next?
Well, depending on what type of relationship they left, whether it was a marriage or they have children in common, I would hope that they get to a place of aftercare for themselves, whether that is mental, spiritual, but seek opportunities to continue to grow and elevate yourself so that going forward, you don't ever fall into a situation where you are dealing with abuse again in the future. And there's plenty of things that you can do. I think that's my biggest thing, is self-care, and continue to elevate as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, and continue to know that you're not alone. You're not just not alone during this. but you also, afterwards, you're not abandoned out there. There's a lot of resources out there for you. Do you have anything else coming up between now and the end of the year?
We do several events at the end of the year, toy drives for our clients' children. We have a fun event here at the office called, it's just basically Halloween, but we partner with another nonprofit called Yalloween, and they give costumes to our client children, and then our staff dresses up in elaborate costumes themselves, and we allow the children to come and trick or treat here. So we have that. And then the holiday events where we try to do a big toy drive and get, as many kids fun toys and things for the end of year holidays.
So it sounds like you really kind of cover the whole year doing these different events, doing everything. Maisha, I am so thrilled that you have been on this show today, and you cover such a wide area. What is the wide area again that you cover in Texas?
We are in Austin, Grimes, Harris, Fort Bend, Waller, Washington counties for legal services. We also provide BIPP in Montgomery, Harris, Fort Bend, and Galveston counties. So about 8 different counties that surround or are contiguous to Harris County is where we do our work.
And what is your website, and how can people reach your organization?
Sure. So we are www.avda.org.
Excellent. Maisha, thank you so much for appearing on this podcast. I really am honored to have had you. Again, you've been listening to Maisha Colter, and she is the Chief Executive Officer for the Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse in the beautiful state of Texas. Thank you again, Maisha.
Thank you for having me, Lori.